Hey, Jacob in Washington, thanks for waiting. We are here and ready to talk to you now.
Hi. Well, okay. So you can hear me okay?
Yes, please.
Awesome. So, yeah, I am a Christian, and I believe that morality is necessarily divorced from a God.
Okay, then we're in agreement about everything except for the God part.
Yeah. It's very strange. Like in the last 6 months, I have changed my position on a lot of things, and it's I can tell there's a very strong dichotomy between what I believe and what I think I can show, and it's very strange to me. So
it's a frustrating position to be in when you're convinced of something and yet completely baffled as to how you would show that it's the case.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
if I'm just going to guess, but if I were to ask you, why do you believe a God exists? I don't suspect you would have a ready answer. I think it would be fuzzier than that.
Because I'm avoiding an argument from authority.
You believe because you're avoiding an argument from authority.
And essentially, that's how I boil it down. Because if you were to tell me there is no evidence for a globe Earth, I said, okay, I'll take your word on it. That would be intellectually dishonest of me, because the evidence is obvious and abundant. A few thousand years ago, if you were to tell me that, in order to take you at your word, maybe do a little experiment here and there and be like, okay, I believe you. But today...
I apologize, but this seems backward to me.
Yes.
So you believe that there is a God. Are you saying that there's just abundant evidence for God?
No, what I'm saying is I haven't done enough searching for evidence for God.
Okay.
To logically conclude that there is no God.
Okay, but
or that there is no evidence for God.
So here's the thing. Do you believe in Bigfoot?
No.
Have you spent a lot of time researching Bigfoot?
Not a ton.
Have you spent as much time researching Bigfoot as you have God?
No.
So there's a claim that you've spent less time researching, and yet you don't accept it. And then there's a claim where you spent more time researching, and yet you accept it because you don't think you've spent enough time gathering evidence against it. Do you understand that you've essentially shifted the burden of proof from where it should be? Like, if there is a God, that is a proposition which should not be accepted until there's sufficient evidence for it. Instead, there's a proposition, and you're accepting it because you haven't found sufficient evidence against it. And if you were going to be consistent, then you should believe in Bigfoot because you haven't found sufficient evidence against Bigfoot, right?
Yes, and I almost agree with you, because I come into the situation of I grew up, and I would agree that I was indoctrinated into a young earth Christianity. And I'm no longer young earth. I believe, I accept evolution, and I accept an old earth, and I accept the 13.8-ish billion-year-old universe. But see, the thing is, I'm here. I believe in a God. Yes, I do believe there is a God. So in order for me to change that belief, I have to say, okay.
But that what you're saying right now, Jacob, is okay. Instead of figuring out what a default position should be, I'm just going to say that if I already believe it, the burden of proof is to show that I'm wrong. And if I don't already believe it, the burden of proof is to show that I'm wrong.
Yeah. The default position is definitely coming into the situation blind. The default position is don't believe it until there's sufficient evidence to show that it is real.
That's what it should be. But what you were implying just a moment ago is that because you already believe there's a God, you are putting the burden of proof on finding evidence that there's not.
No, I'm not putting the burden of proof on finding evidence against God. I'm tentatively. Well, I literally still believe there is a God.
Okay, what would change your mind?
I can't.
What would change your mind on whether or not there's a God? I mean, you believe there's a God. What would change your mind?
Either evidence to the contrary or a sufficient, overwhelming body of evidence that there is no reasonable conclusion.
Those are the same thing. You said evidence to the contrary, and then you said evidence that. Hey, how about I give you a third option?
Yeah.
So let's say you believed in Bigfoot, and I were to ask you what would change your mind, and you would say evidence that there is no Bigfoot. What if we were to show you that you were not justified in accepting Bigfoot to begin with, and that your only reasonable position would be to withhold belief until it's warranted?
I don't think those are exactly analogous, because we know that if there was a Bigfoot, how we would find evidence for Bigfoot. And we have had numerous surveys of, I guess we'll just take the Northwest Sasquatch version of Bigfoot, just like the Northwest area. We've had plenty of surveys, plenty of hiking, plenty of people out in that area. And just the amount of people that's been there, we should be able to find some type of evidence for Bigfoot. But
and you don't think that in the entire history of human beings, with humans offering up a countless number of gods that they all seem to have experienced and yet can't provide evidence for, you don't think that that's roughly comparable?
I
mean, what evidence do we have for a God?
I think first we need to know
what the thing is. I don't know of any evidence.
Okay. So what you're essentially saying is you believe in something and you don't know what the evidence is for it, and you'll stop believing it when there's evidence against it. And all I'm trying to get you to realize is that if we were to be intellectually honest, that should not be the way we think about anything. This isn't about a God. If you want to say, I believe that, hell, I don't know, the moon is made of green cheese, and until somebody gives me evidence to the contrary, I'm going to hold that position. I mean, that is by definition what we would call irrational.
But see, part of showing me that the default position must be, the lack of belief until there's evidence. Part of that lack of belief until there's evidence, the burden of proof is on you to at least look for the evidence. No,
that's not burden of proof. I would agree with you that if you care about the question, you have your best course of action is to go seeking the evidence. But that would suggest that you really don't care whether or not it's true that this God being exists. You just want to believe it, which is why you haven't looked. Or maybe you could argue that you haven't looked because you're afraid you'll find that you don't actually have any good evidentiary support for it. But Jeff mentioned something a minute ago, which we kind of glossed over, which had to do with defining God. And the way I would address that is this. You believe in a God. Which one and how did you decide that was the God that was believable when others weren't?
Yeah. So with my job, I have the ability to just listen to stuff on my phone throughout the day. So I have been listening to just science talks, mostly like Neil deGrasse Tyson and Krauss and that kind of stuff. About 4 to 6 months ago, the almighty YouTube algorithm found me, just automatically started playing one of your videos and one of Aaron Ra's videos. And then I went from listening to science straight to, atheism, atheism at that point, about 6 months ago. And so prior to that, it would have been an older, I hate to say it this way, but, just a basic, Christianity type God. I mean, that is what I believe in. I hate to say it because, which Christianity. But, up until that point, I didn't even care about the moral argument. It didn't, it never entered my mind to even think about it. And then listening to your videos, I can see now the issues with morality in the Bible, but I still believe in the Bible God. So therefore, the Bible God.
Okay, I don't know what the Bible God is, and I'm not just being obtuse.
Yeah.
For Jeff, is there a way to define this better? But at the end of the day, what's going to end up happening is once you tell us what God it is that you believe in, the question is still going to be why. And if the only reason that you seem to be able to give is because nobody's proved that God doesn't exist. So it almost feels like you're beginning with this nebulous concept of God. And through the process of listening to science, launching objections. Well, clearly it can't be a young earth and it can't be this. And so you started with this wide definition of God and you're plucking all the things out and just clinging to whatever is left. And you've established a methodology where you're expecting to keep clinging to that until every little thing of it has been removed. And what I'm trying to drive home is that every one of those little things that you are still clinging to need to be confirmed before belief is warranted, not disconfirmed before you give it up.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say before you even start looking for evidence, you need to have a clear idea of what it is you're trying to identify. Because the Bible God is a very vague thing.
Yeah, and I realize Bigfoot doesn't necessarily work with everybody else, but to kind of beat the analogy to death, it would be like saying, "Oh, I believe in Bigfoot, but I don't think that he lives in, the Pacific Northwest because we've, searched that area and blah, blah, blah." Or I don't think this is the case. Or maybe you could say, I don't believe they still exist. I believe they existed before. So as each little component of Bigfoot, hey, there's this video footage, but we know now that this was faked by a couple of guys. So clearly that's not footage. And you're plugging, you would be removing everything else and yet saying, I still believe in Bigfoot. And the thing is, okay, what is left about the God you believe in that you can actually verify and have an evidentiary warrant for believing?
Yeah. Well, I can't find my note in the minimal characteristics of God, but it would basically be a all powerful or like basically maximally powerful God.
Sure.
That is omnipresent,
Sure, you're going for the God of classical theism. The omnimax God of classical theism. The thing is, do you have any evidence that there is anything that is maximally powerful or omniscient?
Well, that's see, kind of close to like the omni-God or the maximal God, but morality can't be in there. But also, in order for it to be a God, it has to manifest in reality. If it doesn't manifest in reality, it's not real. Even if it exists, if it doesn't manifest in reality, he, she, it, or they aren't real.
This is and this is why I mentioned earlier to Jeff the problem of being able to claim to detect the undetectable. So you believe in a God. You also believe that if it doesn't manifest in reality, it's not a God. So that leads to the question, in what ways has the God you believed in manifested in reality?
Well, I believe the Bible is basically or mostly true. So it has interacted with people.
Okay, so if I had said, in what ways does Bigfoot manifest in reality? And you had said, I believe the stories in Bigfoot are mostly true. Does that answer my question at all?
Okay, so you're saying what ways does it manifest in reality?
Yeah, you've said that a God isn't real if it doesn't manifest in reality, and yet you believe in a God. So I'm asking, in what ways does the God you believe in manifest in reality?
Do you mean to me, or do you mean like in the stories of the Bible?
No, I mean,
Go.
I don't mean to jump in, but, does...
You have to.
Does God, part the waters? Does God cure people of illnesses? Does God reveal himself through visions to people who are sufficiently devout?
But even without specifics, you are convinced that a God exists and that a God must manifest in reality. And given only those two things, all I need for you to do is say, I am convinced that God, the God I believe in, has manifested in reality in this way, and then say whatever it is. And then I can either agree with you that that would be a manifestation of God, or I can disagree that that would, be reasonable to conclude that that's a God manifesting. But we haven't even got past the first step.
Yeah, okay, so...
what does God do, and how do you know he did it?
Well, he performed the miracles for Jesus Christ, and he...
How do you know? What? Give me a miracle and how you know it's true.
I'd have to say I believe it because that's what I was taught, and I'm not 100% sure anymore.
Well, okay, it isn't about 100%. If you believed in Bigfoot because that's what you had taught, and you say, but okay, I'm not 100%. I'm not concerned that much about the percentage. I'm wondering why being taught something is in any way a justification of concluding that God exists. Yeah, okay. Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the honest response. I think, honestly, and because there's a bunch of callers here and I don't really see us getting much further, think about that. Figure out what sorts of things you would find compelling, what you currently find compelling, how John Loftus has this outsider test for faith, and it's about what should convince someone else. So if I were to tell you all of this, everything that you've said about your God, if I were to tell you that I believe in a different God and had all the same reasons, would you find my case compelling?
Absolutely not, but I didn't start out with a belief in your God.
Yes, but you could say, I completely favor equal rights, but I didn't start out thinking that people of all races were equal. I started out thinking that my race was the preferred race. And merely setting a burden of proof to prove yourself wrong while acknowledging that this is just a de facto position you kind of started with and massaged. I mean, you've just acknowledged it wouldn't be convincing coming from somebody else, so why would it be convincing for you?
Because I can't ignore what I already believe.
Sure, you can.
I already... You
don't think you can change your mind? You don't think that... And here's the other question.
I've changed my mind a whole lot in the last, last 5 years, let alone just the last 6 months.
I get you. And here's the other question. Are you actually convinced that a God exists? Or are you just... Yes. Okay. And for clarity, the reason you're convinced is because that's what you were taught.
It's because I have all these things in the back of my mind. This when I was young, I had the voice of God speak to me.
How do you know?
Because at the time, it was telling me not to do something that was bad.
Yes, but how do you know that's the voice of God?
Coming at it as an outside observer, it sounds more like that was just my conscience telling me not to. But coming at it from where I was at the time, I don't have a way to reconcile personal revelation.
Well, yeah, you can't ever. But the thing is, recognizing that. So what if I told you that when I was younger, I felt that God had spoken to me in some sense too? And now I'm convinced that I was mistaken, that I had no good reason to reach the conclusion that it was actually a God revealing things to me. And how do I tell the difference between, and how can you So set aside what I think of what you believe. How do you tell the difference between God speaking to you and you just thinking that God spoke to you?
Yeah, I don't know.
If you can't tell the difference, then you can't claim that it was God speaking to you. All you can ever do is claim you thought God spoke to you.
Maybe a better way to put it is, here's my belief in God. I'm going to take it, put it right here, put a pin in it, and say, okay, we're going to put that right there. Now we're going to go and look for evidence. The first part of evidence is listening to people who claim they have a proof for God. And because I can listen to this on YouTube while I'm working, I have listened to a couple hundred formal debates, maybe more, and I'm going to continue listening to those because my job allows it. And then
Jacob, I think that before you delve into YouTube videos and whatnot, I think the best step for you to take is to really make a close examination of what it is that you believe, because you may watch a YouTube video and not realize that person's idea of God is a fundamentally different.
I'm not just talking about a YouTube video, like.
Well, I'm just using that as an example, but
I understand
because you can you don't have to depend on others to reach conclusions on this if there is a God.
Especially one that talks to you.
Well, sure. So I would say take some time to really clearly examine what you believe to be true about the deity that you believe in, and then try and look at it and say, okay, if this is true, then what must necessarily follow, and see if that in fact necessarily follows.
Well, that's exactly what I'm doing.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm spending about 50 plus hours a week on this. Most of it is listening to talks, listening to debates. I'm very distinct.
I think the biggest problem,
debates, like ones that are held at colleges and things like that, versus informal debates like YouTube channels and people having their own little discussions. And I'm listening to the Bible on.
Here's the problem, Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
If the God that you believe in is in fact unfalsifiable, then you will spend eternity waiting for someone to falsify it, and they never will. And so you will continue and maintain this belief in something which cannot be disproved. And that will tell you absolutely nothing about whether or not it's real. You have to begin. There's a reason why we begin with withholding acceptance of a proposition until it's warranted. Because if the proposition is unfalsifiable, which means there's no way to show that it is false, then you will believe in a God, a nebulous, ill-defined whatever that talked to you once, forever, because no one will ever be able to prove that it's not true. And do you see a problem with that? Because 20 people could believe in 20 different gods that are all unfalsifiable for their entire life. They have no hope of ever being proved false, and yet they will continue to believe this thing, and they can't all be right.
It's not about looking for evidence against God. It's about looking for evidence for God and not finding it.
Yes, that's what it should be. But what you've said repeatedly throughout the call is, when I asked you what would change your mind, it was about somebody proving that there isn't a God.
Well, that was one thing which I'm not, that's one thing that would prove it easily. But the thing is if it's an
and you know what else would solve this?
You can't prove it that way. But the other thing that
you know what else would solve this really easily? If God showed up and revealed himself to everybody. That'd solve this too, real easy, wouldn't it?
Right. And
why doesn't that happen?
That's why the other criteria.
Why doesn't that happen?
Criteria is That's a good question.
Yeah. Ask God, and since he talks to you, maybe he'll tell you.
On your divine hiddenness,
Yeah.
Where did I put my note for that? Problem of divine hiddenness.
Well, while you're looking, Jacob, I wanted to jump back to the very beginning of the conversation because you said that you believe in a God in order to avoid an argument from authority. Yeah. And everything that you're saying, it seems you're only looking for evidence from authorities, and also that you accepted the very first argument from authority that was made from your parents, I presume, and then have at least consciously excluded all other arguments from authority, which is good. I would just argue you need to also exclude that very first argument from authority that was made to you, whether you knew it was happening or not.
That's the problem with prior belief.
Yes.
The only problem with prior belief is a refusal to accept when it was unwarranted. A dogged clinging to a concept just because it's cherished, because it was something, it gives me hope, it gives me pleasure, it came from my parents. All of those things, those are the things that keep us in prior beliefs. You know what? There's another name for prior beliefs, prejudice, where you begin with an assumption or something that you were taught about a particular category of item or people or whatever. And it is very difficult to overcome that because it may not be the sort of thing that you're going to find, even in a search, evidence against. And if you just say, well, it's a prior belief, then it feels like you care less about whether what you believe is true than whether or not it is comforting or something you learned or prior, et cetera. But prior beliefs, all they do is prejudice your ability to objectively, as possible, evaluate the question.
And I understand that I did come across the belief due to bad reasons. And that doesn't tell me whether or not it's true.
Correct.
And
it doesn't. You can believe something for really bad reasons and be correct. However, if all you have is bad reasons and you get rid of those, you need to find good reasons to continue to hold on to that view because you have no good reason to believe it's true. It may be true. It could be true that my socks are lucky. And if I walked in with a prior belief that my socks were lucky and expected people to prove to me that my socks weren't lucky, we would be here forever with me thinking of lucky socks. But if I realize that my reasons for believing that I have lucky socks were bad, it's not even a decision. You don't consciously
prove that I'm wrong.
You don't consciously choose your beliefs. This is probably the sticking point and why I get occasionally frustrated in some of these conversations because there's a missing component. If I care about what's true and someone comes along and I acknowledge all of my reasons for believing this are bad and that they don't guarantee that what I believe is true, I don't make a decision to stop believing it. I just can't do anything else but not believe it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering what else there is that you're clinging to, because if you acknowledge that you have nothing but bad reasons, then what's the good reason?
Because I don't think I have...
Stop! I hurt you last time because you did not stop.
I'm on the phone here. Sorry.
That's fine.
That's all right. It happens.
I don't think I've made, I know I've spent years just being apathetic about the question. So I don't believe that I've currently spent enough time looking into the evidence to change my belief.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say you could devote your entire life to that pursuit and not find what it is that you're looking for, I think because of the way you're going about the search or even undertaking the search itself.
Well,
but the thing is, if you say,
where do I stop?
No. Why should you stop? Nobody's saying you should stop. What I'm saying is, if you have not investigated this enough to conclude that you're wrong, then you cannot have investigated enough to conclude that you're right. You are in no way ever forced to make a decision and make it permanent that I am absolutely convinced that there is a God or I am absolutely convinced that there's not a God. There's no requirement of that. It is, and this is why when I asked, do you actually believe that a God exists? And I didn't get to finish, but the follow-up is, or are you just convinced that it's a good idea for people to profess belief? But at the end of the day, I don't understand how you can say, I just haven't looked into it enough to conclude there's not a God, when that's not the thing that anybody's asking you to conclude. What we're asking you to conclude is that your current conclusion that there is a God is unwarranted.
Or is warranted.
It's like you walked into a courtroom and you're sitting on the jury and you began with a conclusion that the defendant's guilty, rather than starting with presumed innocent. And halfway through the trial, somebody comes along and says, what do you think? And you're like, I think he's guilty, but I haven't really looked into it enough. I mean, is that wrong? Is that not an accurate summary of kind of where we got to?
I don't think it works in this situation. Because I'm starting out.
But that's going from the argument of ignorance fallacy, that's special pleading, that this particular belief or proposition is somehow special and warrants different treatment than, is the sun going to rise tomorrow?
I tell you what, there's a bunch of callers, Jacob, and I appreciate your time and everything, but I want to move on to some other stuff. So think about that. We never want somebody to call in and then just beat them up and blah, 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 and they got no answers. And that is not the purpose of this.
The reason I called is to learn.
Yeah. And so think on those things, process those, come back with more and better or different questions. Anything that's going to help the process learn. You're welcome to call back, but I am going to move on to some other callers.
Yeah. Yeah, okay.
All right.
Too bad I wish they could have talked about morality instead.
Well, I think we spent quite a bit of time talking today about morality over the course of 2 shows, so it'd probably be better to call back with that one on another week as well. But thanks for calling in. I appreciate the time.